It was sometime around this time of year, my freshman year of college. I was probably procrastinating writing a final, but I came to a sudden and overwhelming realization. I didn't know how to make anything from scratch. Now, don't get me wrong, I did cook meals for myself. I was able to stay fed, but I didn't make anything. Everything I wore, every item in my home, was something I had either purchased, had been given as a hand-me-down, or had been given as a gift. And I wasn't necessarily upset by this awakening. Perhaps I was just kind of surprised. It was just something I hadn't considered before. I felt like the ultimate consumer. For whatever reason, I decided that day that I would learn how to make something. A friend and I headed to Michael's. It's funny now thinking back on it that many years ago that this was before a time where you just Googled things and then ordered them on Amazon. So we physically went to Michael's and we wandered around the aisles trying to decide if we wanted to try sewing. The answer was no, that was far too expensive. Crochet, maybe, or knitting. The decision was seemingly made for us once we found the book entitled Cool Stuff, How to Knit, sold. We purchased various sizes of knitting needles and a few different skeins of yarn. And over the course of the following years, I wouldn't say that I ever became a great knitter, but I did create washcloths and fingerless gloves, hats and scarves. I loved taking something that started like this and turning it into something that became like this. The act of creation felt empowering. But what I think was most impactful was changing the way I thought about myself. I had this script in my head that I couldn't create. I couldn't do something that was considered a craft or an art. With the act of making my first knit washcloth, crooked edges and all, I shifted my own self-understanding from I can't to I can. The stories we tell about ourselves have the power to change us. I believe that's why we are blessed to inherit the cachet of stories of Jewish tradition. After all, that is why we study the same Torah portions year after year, to uncover how we have changed from the last time that we read the story. Thinking of what voices speak most loudly to us this year. What events do we view anew with fresh eyes? We have such a treasure trove of texts, from the Bible to Midrash to Mishnah and Talmud, and that doesn't even begin to skim the breadth of Jewish sacred writings. But one of the ways we know that how we tell our stories mattered to the Jews of centuries past also comes from what they decided to leave in the Bible and what they decided to leave out. You may be aware that the story of Hanukkah as found in the books of Maccabees is not included in the Jewish Bible. If you flip through a Tanakh, you will not find it. It's only thanks to the Christian Bible that this version of the story has made its way through the centuries. In the telling from the book of Maccabees, you will not read about a Hanukkah miracle involving oil. Instead, you'll find an account of the ruling power oppressing the Jews, taking away their freedoms to practice their religion, and then the revolt led by the Maccabees that followed. While many of us know this piece of the Hanukkah story, it's not the story we tell about Hanukkah. So two questions remain. Why the rejection of the story is told in the books of Maccabees? And where did the story we know best come from? It will come as no surprise that a story about a small group of violent radicals taking on and defeating the ruling power under whom they lived was not a popular story throughout the centuries, as Jews lived under various foreign empires. It seemed like a suspicious story for Jews to be excited about when under Ottoman rule or another ruler, and it was not a great PR strategy either. The rabbis of the Talmud do not mention this narrative of the war, really, at all. In the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 21b, the rabbis ask, "My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah?" And this is where we get the story we know so well. You'll see they breeze over the military piece. When the Greeks entered the temple, it says, they defiled all the sacred oil for the menorah, And when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil, which only contained enough oil sufficient for one day's lighting. Yet a great miracle happened, and the lamp remained lit for 8 days. That's the story of Hanukkah we know, and it comes from the Talmud. As far as we know, this is the origin of this story that we tell year after year. We have no idea if it had been passed down through the generations. What is possible to assume, though, is that it wasn't safe, again, to tell a story of a military victory, of the triumph of the few over the many throughout many periods in Jewish history. As time went on, our sages looked for a way to bring meaning to this holiday for a new generation of Jews, and so they chose to downplay the violence and uphold the light. They quite literally rewrote the story of Hanukkah, a story which still resonates today and we still tell today. In a time of great difficulty, they found a way to hang on to hope that life could be different, that light defeats darkness, that hope tempers fear. In her TED Talk, How Changing Your Story Can Change Your Life, Lori Gottlieb, American psychotherapist, writer, and speaker, teaches on the importance of stories. She says that stories are the way we make sense of our lives. This means that they hold both great power and great danger, she teaches. As a therapist, she reminds us also that we are all unreliable narrators of our own lives, every single one of us. This means that some of our stories serve us and some do not. But it also means, as unreliable narrators, we can be intentional in the edits we make to the stories we tell about ourselves and our lives. This is precisely what I believe the rabbis of the Talmud were doing when creating the story of the miracle of the oil that was only thought to last 1 full day and ended up burning for 8. They saw the possibility of a story that would serve as a reminder for hope during the darkest time of year. While I'm ashamed to say that I cannot find the source for what I'm about to share, it's something I saw on Facebook this week that stuck with me. Try as I might, I've not been able to locate the original post nor the author, but I do recall it was said by a contemporary female rabbi, and so if anyone finds it anywhere, please let me know. But it added an edit to our Hanukkah miracle story, especially powerful in this year, I thought. She said something along the lines of that the miracle of Hanukkah wasn't that the oil lasted for 8 days. No, she says. The miracle was that someone was brave enough to search for the oil and to take the action to relight the lamp in the first place. As we watch 2020 draw to a close, of which many of us are grateful for, it's hard not to think of the pull of the calendar and where we are in the year. We are constantly on a treadmill of time upon which we continue to take step after step, stride after stride, and sometimes it feels as though we have managed to travel great distances or traverse tremendous valleys, achieved great heights. And yet sometimes we feel that despite however long we've tried, we haven't made any progress at all. We feel stuck in the same place we were a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, or even years. And time has moved on. Our lives are to some extent defined by the cycle of the calendar, but more so how we tell our story as each calendar year continues. We find ourselves reminded of the power of light at this season of Hanukkah, the power of stories and how we tell them and what we focus on, and where the power in those stories lie. And remembering that we can edit them to enable us to bring more light into the world. The story of a military victory would not inspire us to bring more light and goodness into the world right now. The story of a miracle of light, of people who decided to light that menorah in the ancient temple to rededicate it, to hold on to hope is something that we can hold on to. Although the example I began my remarks with that led to me taking on knitting is a small one, it's a powerful example in my own life of deciding to take ownership of my own story. It is only all these years later that I see my initial assumption may have been incorrect. I do create things, just usually out of words instead of materials. The problem wasn't that I didn't knit. The problem was that I didn't place value on what it was that I did create. The truth is, all of us create. By focusing on the light during Hanukkah, we are reminded that we are bringers of light. Just sometimes we need help retelling our stories, to bring that into focus. I wish each and every one of you a Chag Urim Sameach, a truly happy season of light. And I hope that as you think about your stories and who you are, you focus on those pieces that you bring light to the world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.